In this video, I'm going to talk about how the narcissist triggers your nervous system. Just about every client that I work with experiences this on some level, particularly towards the beginning when they have first come out of a relationship with a narcissistic person, to where the toxic patterns and kind of the dysfunction of that relationship continues to carry forward. And I find most of the time that just because we get away from that person or we are living in different households or whatever it is, doesn't necessarily break the emotional patterns that are in place. And I know for me, it actually took me several years. Hopefully it doesn't take you that long. Hopefully this helps to shorten your trajectory. But for me personally, it actually took me several years to kind of identify that, understand it, and be able to start to break that pattern. Before I dive into this a little more, let me just remind you, if you like this content and you find it helpful, don't forget to hit like on this video. Also subscribe to the channel so that you get notified as new videos are released. This particular subject came up because I had several clients over the past couple of weeks who are all struggling with this same issue. And so when I see a pattern, I like to do a video on it because that means all of you are probably struggling with this as well. And what happens is we've been in this relationship with a narcissistic person, and most of the time we're the codependent aspect of the relationship, right? Which means we're seeking approval, we're seeking validation, we're wanting to feel, validated and loved and valued and all of those things. And it almost becomes like we're desperate to get that approval from the other person. And the other person, who is the narcissistic person in the relationship, kind of doles that out in ways that they want to in order to be able to manipulate you emotionally and for them to be able to keep the upper hand. Now, all of this isn't necessarily conscious a lot of times. I think it's just that it's how the patterns of these behaviors go. And what happens is we get away from this person, but then we're still trying to co-parent and we're still communicating with them. And we have a lot of fear around their disapproval or around disappointing them. So what happens is as soon as they're displeased or upset or whatever, one of a few different things happen. Either it triggers fear for us and we start running around trying to figure out, oh, okay, how do I fix this? How do I had a client recently who the other parent got upset because they didn't return some clothes. And so that parent immediately went, oh my goodness, I got to go find these clothes right now and get them back to them ASAP. And I was like, no, you don't. You just send a note saying, hey, I've got the clothes. I kept them so that I could wash them. They were dirty, and I'll return them to you at the next exchange, right? That's a normal, logical approach to it. But it didn't even occur to my client to respond in that way because they got triggered by the disapproval and the narcissistic person being upset. And so they immediately went into that trauma response where they started trying to fix it. And depending on the type of narcissist that you've been in a relationship with, sometimes it's them coming back with disapproval. Sometimes it's them attacking you. Sometimes they go silent, right? And they'll give you the silent treatment. It just depends on that person and what their patterns are as to how they quote unquote punish you emotionally, right? But what happens is whatever our ingrained response to that is what we go into. And I know that for me, even after I was with Thomas, my late husband, who started this podcast with me, you can go back and, look at, if you go back about 2 years or so, you'll see him, but he passed away and he was, an attorney. And when he and I first got together, I can remember him saying to me, why are you running around doing all this stuff for your ex-husband? And a lot of times it wasn't even things that were related to the kids, right? It was just requests for him personally, like come help him, got a flat tire on the car, come help him, or, I need you to come pick me up, or I need, whatever. And Thomas would say, why are you doing this? I mean, Thomas didn't care. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't that kind of thing. As a matter of fact, I would say he's probably the most gracious person that I've ever known in many, many ways, because he did tolerate a lot of that stuff. But he was just so confused by it. And he'd be like, I don't understand like why you're even doing this. And for me, honestly, I didn't really know either. I mean, I would make up excuses in my head of like, oh, well, we live in California. We're from Kentucky. All of our families are back there. Neither of us have anybody else here. He doesn't have anybody else to help him, or it's going to, roll onto the kids and, he's going to be calling one of them to come help him, or, whatever. I had every excuse in the book, right, of why I was engaging in this behavior with my ex-husband. But the honest to goodness answer is that he still had the emotional upper hand at that point. I was still allowing myself to be emotionally manipulated in these ways and running around and seeking his approval. And it's very odd to look back on it now. It almost feels like I was a very different person then, but it's very weird to think about how I ran around trying to do certain things. And it's like, why? I don't know. Because when I finally, I do know it was just the continuing of that toxic pattern. And the reason that I was doing it is because I hadn't broken that yet, right? I was away from him physically. I wasn't married to him. I wasn't anything. I was actually married to Thomas at the time, but I was still in that emotional pattern of our relationship. And this is why I talk so much to people about boundaries. I did not have good boundaries with him in the beginning. Parenting apps weren't as common then. I mean, this is like 20 years ago. And so there's certain things that we've kind of have come along in the process where we kind of know that I didn't know at the time. And I didn't really build that boundary and kind of insulate myself from him so that he couldn't manipulate me in those ways. And that's one of the first things I talk to people about when they're new on this journey is, how do you start to insulate yourself from the other person? Well, you use a parenting app and you do pickups and drop-offs at, daycares as much as you can, or through third parties, and you don't do phone calls and you avoid face-to-face contact, right? All of those things help to insulate you emotionally so that you don't fall back into that pattern where you're being emotionally manipulated, because that's your normal. That's what feels comfortable. That's what is kind of safe for you in a certain way because it's what you're used to. And so to change that pattern, it can be really scary. And I have some clients that are like, they get really fearful. They're like, well, what if the other parent gets upset? Well, what if, the other parent reacts in this way or whatever? And it's like, okay, well, then they're going to be upset. That's okay. They'll get over it, and then some people go, oh, well, they'll retaliate through the kids. Okay, maybe they will. But here's the thing. You have to let those things happen in the short term, because the more that another parent does that, the more leverage it gives you over the long term to go into the court and be able to say, look, here's the patterns of behavior that are happening, right? But if you're constantly cleaning things up and intervening and trying to keep the other parent from being upset about anything, then you sort of take away your ability to expose their patterns, right, for what they are. So really letting those patterns happen and come through is a much better form of evidence for you. So really just stop cleaning up the messes, right? And this can be everything from, I've had clients that, the other parent, you essentially pack a bag and you send the kids, and the other parent sends the clothes back or whatever, and then you wash them and you do all the stuff, and then you send them back the next time with a clean packed bag of clothes, right? And the idea is that if the other parent's going to be the parent part of the time, then they need to take on all those parenting responsibilities. Now, I know when you first separate, sometimes those things can look a little different. When your children are really young, sometimes those things can look a little different. But overall, those parenting responsibilities become divided between the two of you. So if there were things that one of you that you always did, well, okay, that's not how it works anymore. Now that parent has to pick up that slack on their parenting time. Once I started to kind of recognize that, what, every time I get a phone call, it is nothing good for me. And it's nothing even really about the children normally. Narcissistic people in particular are really good at using the children as manipulation. And I find a lot of times they'll actually call you when they have the children, because what that triggers in you is, oh my goodness, something's wrong. I got to pick up the phone. And then you pick up the phone and then it has nothing to do with the child, or there's no emergency or whatever. I was saying to somebody the other day, in 17 or 18 years of doing this, I don't think I've ever had there actually be an emergency with the child. I don't think that's ever happened that I can recall off the top of my head. So it's very, very rare. Okay. I'm not saying that that never happens, but it's pretty rare. Most of the time, it's a manipulative move to get you to answer the phone, particularly if you've been trying to draw that particular boundary and not have face-to-face or telephone calls with them. So they tend to find these ways to use the children to manipulate you around those things. And when I actually got to the point to where I was able to draw that boundary and say, you know what, I'm not answering this call, or I'm not going to help him, or I'm not whatever. It was harder to answer the call and then say no. That was a harder thing for me at that stage of the, relationship between me and him than it was to just not answer the call at all. Because it's like, well, if he really needs something, he'll leave a message, right? But most of the time he wouldn't leave a message. Why? Because what he wanted really wasn't, probably my responsibility to fix. But then it drives us crazy if we're an overthinker, right? Into, well, what did they want? And they didn't leave a message, and now I don't know. And just sometimes that need to know drives us to even answer that call or whatever. And again, that person knows that about you, right? They know you're an overthinker. They know that you're a control freak like me. They know that you want to figure out what's going on or whatever. And they utilize those things to manipulate you. And so the best thing that you can do is just let go. Like, I don't care what they're doing. I don't care what their thing is. I don't care what they're upset about. It doesn't matter. Like, I'm not picking up. I'm not answering. I'm not whatever. If they really need something, or there's an issue with the child that we got to work out, we're going to communicate through either the parenting app or our texts or however we normally communicate. And that's going to be that, right? And just not getting sucked into those old patterns of behavior, and identifying that you're still doing that is the first step in being able to stop doing that. And I would say the best way to stop doing it is to build those barriers around yourself to where you're kind of insulating yourself emotionally from them. Then you will gain strength and you will be able to draw that boundary. And that was part of what I failed to do in the beginning, is I didn't draw those boundaries. I didn't insulate myself from him emotionally. And so because I was continually being triggered over and over, even after the separation, I never actually got to heal that and to find my own strength. Right? So it's important that you give yourself that insulation so that you can heal from that and get strong enough to where you can stand face to face with them and draw a boundary and say, no, I'm not doing that. Of course, now I'm 20 years down the road. You can put me in a room with my ex-husband. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. No problem. I have no problem telling him no. But I'm in a very different emotional state than I was 20 years ago. If you would like help identifying these patterns and being able to overcome this type of lack of boundary with your narcissistic person, you can go to divorceuniversityonline.com/VIP-coaching. There's information on that page on my group coaching programs for moms and for dads. And there's also information on my one-on-one VIP coaching services. If you have a more complicated case, or you just feel like you want a higher level of support, that may be something that you want to check out as well. So thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next time.